We finished chapter 7. We were talking about the time, times, and half a time, which we likened to 3.5 years. There were several different ways that we discussed it. It could be talked about as time, times, and half a time, or 3.5 years, or we could count it out even as days. But no matter how it is discussed in the Bible, it's always talking about a time of persecution for God's saints, as it's discussed in the Scriptures. Now, as we get into chapter 8, we began by reading the chapter and Daniel's vision. And as we move into that chapter, we discussed that Daniel in vision was by the river Ulai, and he was in the province of Elam, which is not to be confused with the people of the people of Elam, the Elamites. Those are two separate things. That's in a different region of the world, but this is a province of Elam, and which is actually in Persia. Now, this is not an area of Babylonian control at this time, or at any time of Babylon. So in Daniel's vision, or in his mind's eye, as it were, he was taken to what was going to be the next kingdom and seeing things from what was going to be the next capital in Shushan or Susa. So he is seeing now things from that point of reference. The new kingdom is going to be stationed in Susa, and the next kings from the next empire was going to come from that area. So he sees things from that region, and that's where they were going to come from. Now, we also talked about chapter 8 no longer is in Aramaic. There's a couple of reasons for that. I suggested that it no longer is in the annals of Daniel's writings, is no longer in the annals of the kings of Babylon at this point in time. Plus the fact it's no longer of any concern to those in Babylon. It now refers to those individuals that are Jewish in nature, and so they are interested in what is going to be talked about. Notice as Daniel goes through his vision, he refers to himself, even me, Daniel. He does not refer to his Babylonian name ever in the rest of the visions throughout 8 through 12. He now only refers to himself as Daniel. So these things are not of any consequence to those of the Babylonian people. It's only of consequence to the Jewish people and how it's going to affect them as they go on through the other empires as they will come up. All right. Now, as we go down now through the rest of these verses, he saw this vision, and in his vision he was by this river. Now, no, he says, I'm in this vision. I'm in the vision, and as he's in this vision, he was by this river. Meaning, of course, that he was in another place when he sees this vision. He lifted up his eyes, verse 3, and behold, he saw a ram, which is a male sheep, and he had two horns. The two horns were high, but one was higher than the other. And we likened that last week to that being the Medes and the Persians coming up last, and also being more prominent in the kingdom than that of the Medes. But it was the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians. And if we drop down to about verse 20, I believe it is. What did I just do? All right. They are identified as the Medes and the Persians. As he has been told, it's verse 20. He's told that ram that thou sawest, it has two horns, are the kings of Media and Persia. So this kingdom is identified when he is being told what the vision means. Okay, jumping back up again. Notice as he watches what is taking place, he saw the ram, and the ram pushes westward and northward and southward so that no beast might stand before him. Well, I intended to pull up a map, but I can't find my map right at the moment, so I'm not going to spend any time doing that. But if we remember how Persia developed, Persia came from the east. And so they pushed what direction? First. They pushed west first. They pushed into Babylon and into that area. And then they pushed northward into Syria and into Asia Minor. And then they pushed southward down into Egypt. And so those are the directions that they went, and they went in that order. So the vision is true, what we see Persia doing. They pushed westward and northward and then southward. That's how Persia took the areas that they took. They never went eastward. There was nowhere eastward for them to go in their minds. They had come from the east. And so they never went into India. They never went into China. They never went anywhere further east. They were as far east as they intended. They had the mountains to their back. They were protected in their minds, so they had no place east to go. All right? And notice the Persian army was large. It was cumbersome, and so that they were noticed the idea of a ram. If you've ever seen, I watch these videos a lot about animals, and you'll see this ram is always pushing. If you get a ram, a male sheep, they're always wanting to headbutt something, so they're always pushing. They got their head down and they're pushing, and so poor children, they go in with sheep, and so the ram or whatever is always pushing them down. They're knocking them over because that's just what they do. I don't know why it is, but that's what they're determined to do as part of their dominance. They're wanting to gain dominance or whatever it is in their own mind that they have to do. But this is an interesting thing about them that correlates with the Persian army. They were pushing. They were always pushing a direction. And so slow and cumbersome, and the likeness of the bear that we saw in the earlier vision, it was a big and monstrous army that they had. They weren't particularly quick, they weren't particularly agile, but no one could stand in front of them. They were just very powerful. And so we are told that none could deliver out of their hand. They did according to his will, and they became great. And the Persian empire became a great empire. Okay. So next, in verse 5, we was considering, and behold, a he-goat came up. And so this he-goat came from what direction? The west. So from the viewpoint of a Jew, Palestine being the center of the earth, or from the viewpoint of the Persian army, either way, the Greeks were coming from the west, right? So here he came, the Greeks came from the west, and he had a predominant horn, or a notable horn, between his eyes. Okay, if we drop down to verse 21, we find out that notable horn is who? Okay, that rough he-goat is the king of Greece, and the great horn between his eyes is the first king. So we know now, as we look back through history, that be that of Alexander the Great. In verse 22, we'll notice too, now as before we go back up, we'll notice that when that great horn the first horn is broken, there's 4 other kingdoms that will stand up out of that nation, but not in his power, not according to the first horn's power. The first horn had a lot of power, but the 4 kingdoms, now notice he says 4 kingdoms, and we're going to talk about that for a moment, will stand up in the place of that one first king. Okay, so let's go back up. Okay. He had the notable horn between his eyes, and when he came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I'd seen standing before the river, he ran onto him with the fury of his power. Now we had talked about that Alexander the Great had this vendetta against Persia, right? He had this calling cry that he could rally his army against all of Persia because they burned Athens, correct? So he had this anger, all right? In verse 7, it says he saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler. Do you know what that word was? Or does one of you have another anger or rage? Rage is probably a better word. He had rage against him. Okay? And he smote the ram and broke his 2 horns, and there was no power in the ram to stand before him, but he cast him to the ground and stamped on him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. Now there's not a better depiction of exactly how Alexander destroyed, and I mean utterly destroyed, the Persian army. I mean, he just took them apart. He was smaller. He was, and every time that in the 3 major battles that he came up against him, he just absolutely destroyed them. And the last major battle, it wasn't very long. It wasn't a long battle. In Darius had him greatly outnumbered, but he just didn't have any power to stand against him. And so he ended up running away, and his own people put him to death because he couldn't stand before Alexander. So again, none could deliver the ram out of his hand. So he stamped all over him. I mean, he put him down hard, you would say. And so again, this depiction of what we now look back and is now our history, which would take place several hundred years in the future, at the time that Daniel is giving this vision, is very apropos. Okay. All right. So we go down to verse 8. Therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, it was in the height of Alexander the Great's power that the great horn was broken. Right? When he had everything. I mean, who was going to rise up against Alexander the Great at that point in time? There was no one that was even going to say anything against him at that point. He was powerful. He was a legend in his own time. Right? Okay? the great horn was broken, and then for it came 4 notable horns toward the 4 winds of heaven. Now the idea of toward the 4 winds of heavens was what? I think it has to do more with the idea that they fought. They were not together on anything. They may have been all Greeks, but they weren't together. They weren't a cohesive force.
Like the winds, they were all going in their own direction.
Yes, each one was going in his own direction and for himself, right? Okay? All right. Now comes an interesting thought. I'm sorry. My throat is getting dry very quickly. Out of one of them, okay, there's 4 kingdoms that rise up. And if we remember what we talked about down here in verse 21, 4 kingdoms. He didn't just say 4 kings, he said 4 kingdoms. And that's literally what happened. Cassander had Greece, Lycimus had Asia Minor and Thrace, Seleucus had Syria, and Ptolemy ended up with Egypt. That's the 4 ways that the kingdom was split up. And each of them fought with each other. Now very quickly Rome took Greece. And pretty quickly they ended up with Thrace and Asia Minor. But for a long time, the Seleucid kingdom and the Ptolemaic kingdom lasted for a long time. And we're going to hear about the king of the north and the king of the south in the next vision, okay? And they're going to talk about them, that being the Seleucid kingdom, the king of the north, and Ptolemaic kingdom being the king of the south. And we're going to talk about them for a long time. But right now, we're going to talk about one of them that rises up, and he rises up out of the Seleucid kingdom. Okay. Go back up where I was.
These are like 4 generals under Alexander.
They were 4 generals. There were 4 separate generals that rose up out of Alexander's army, and there were major generals from Alexander's army. Now, Cassander himself murdered Alexander's wife and Alexander the Fourth to make certain that he didn't ever rise, because Alexander the Fourth was just a baby, to make certain that he didn't succeed to the throne when he became old enough. So I mean, there was a lot of subterfuge going on at that time, and again, that ties into that toward the 4 winds of the heaven. As you can see, a ram now that has horns, each of them going a different direction. Okay. All right. All right, before I go into the little horn, let's drop down here to verse 15 and see what Daniel's reaction to everything he's talked about, okay? It came to pass that I, Daniel, again, he refers to himself, I, Daniel, okay? Rather than his Babylonian name again. Had seen the vision, and I sought for the meaning. He didn't understand the things that he was seeing. This had to be very confusing for him at that point in time. It's easy for us to look back in history. It wouldn't be easy if you were there at the time looking forward, having no idea what was about to take place. Okay. Had seen the vision and sought for the meaning, then behold, there stood before me the appearance as of a man. Okay, so there was someone now someone standing beside him, and I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai, which called and said, Gabriel, make this man to understand the vision. So above the banks of the Ulai, somewhere right in the middle of the banks of the Ulai, comes his voice. He says, Gabriel, make this man to understand the vision. Do you realize in the book of Daniel, Michael and Gabriel are mentioned, and we only see those names mentioned in several places in the New Testament, where we see Gabriel mentioned? With Mary, telling the good news about our Lord, right? So he's if this be the same individual, and I would make the case that he most likely is, this angel, this messenger, which what the word angel means, this messenger is fairly important to bring information to mankind, has been used several times to do that. Okay. So he came near to where I stood, and when he came near, I was afraid and fell upon my face. But he said to me, understand, O Son of Man. Where do we see the word Son of Man used? In the Old Testament. Ezekiel is called O Son of Man as well, right? Okay. For the time of the end shall be the vision. Okay, so there's lots of interesting stuff in verse 17, isn't there? So let's tackle them one at a time. First of all, he falls on his face. Why does he fall on his face?
Humility, maybe obeisance. I think that
He says he's afraid.
he tells him to get up later.
Yeah, he says he's afraid. Why would he be afraid?
A power that was speaking.
This was supernatural.
Yeah, it's supernatural.
More than he knew about. You could have understood.
I can only guess at some of the things that had to be going through Daniel's mind at this point in time. But we see this happening to any individual that sees or is put in the presence of someone who has been in the presence of God. If obviously Gabriel had come from the presence of God. He was told by God to come to Daniel and to tell him something. If he had just been in the presence of the Almighty, what kind of a presence would he have had? He had been in some kind of a glorified presence of some sort, right? I mean, when Christ came from the Transfiguration, what was his presence like? When Moses came from the mountain after being in the presence of God, what was his presence like? Did that not cause the people to fear and quake when Moses came down from the mountain? Was not Jesus' disciples afraid of Jesus when he came down from the Mount of Transfiguration? I think this is a natural response from this situation. I don't think there's any individual that won't be petrified from this. Now, Daniel was obviously a man who was pure of heart, was trying to do what God's will, but there's no man who is absolutely free of sin, is there?
Or who's not going to be afraid on this kind of life. Think about Paul on the road to Damascus.
Correct.
So,
When we're in that kind of presence, we realize how weak, how unworthy we are, do we not? I mean, doesn't this type of thing, this is the type of thing that comes to my mind at this point in time. I mean, he realizes he's not worthy to be in that presence. He says he fell on his face. He's prostrate. Boom. He's laid flat out. We're not talking about somebody who's gone on his hands and knees. We're talking about somebody who's flat laid out on the ground. This is not the first time this is going to happen to him. I mean, not the only time this is going to happen to him, by the way.
So it's a human reaction, and on the last day every knee will bow.
Yeah, that's what we're told is going to happen to him when the Lord comes again, too, isn't it? There's a lot of people who are very arrogant and speak arrogantly in this life, but they're not going to do that on the day of judgment, are they? Here's a righteous man who is having trouble, even though he's being spoken kindly of at this point in time. And the second time that this happens to him, he's going to be told, "Oh man, greatly beloved," and he's still not going to have any strength. Okay. All right. He says, understand, O Son of Man. And again, the idea, O Son of Man, is what? Yeah, you're human. You're in the presence of deity, or you are seeing a vision of that which is deity, but you're human. You're a son of man. You're flawed. Okay? Or you're at least human. Okay, so now it says, for the time of the end shall be the vision. And so the question comes to mind, the end of what? Right? Now, premillennialists, they want to make this the end of the world. People want to go come up with all kinds of crazy things about the end. You know, is this the end of the Greek Empire? Is this the end of the Jewish Commonwealth? Is this the end of this? Is this the end of that? They want to go all kinds of things. All right, and some of them are decent questions. Well, why don't we let God's Word tell us? Because it's actually in here. Well, when you see this terminology, the time of the end, search for in what God reveals in His Word what the end of that vision is. Because He's talking about there's an end here, and what is the end of that vision? So when He talks about the time of the end here, it's not going to be the same time of the end that He talks about in later visions that we will talk about in Daniel. I'm going to plant that seed in your head. They're not all the same times of the end. Now, premillennialists will try to say they're all talking about the same thing. But the problem is they're not all talking about the same thing. All right. We'll get back to that phraseology here in just a moment. Or probably not tonight. We'll get back to it next week. But it is an important point, and we need to get to it. Okay, verse 18, He was speaking with me, and I was in a deep sleep with my face toward the ground, but He touched me and set me upright. Okay, now He's gone from a position of being flat on the ground and passed out, basically, to now he's up in an upright position. And he continues to talk to him. And he said, Behold, I will make thee to know what shall be in the last end of the... Now here's another interesting phrase. What is it? Okay. The time appointed, in the version I had, the last end of the indignation is what King James Version says. The end shall be. Okay? So we'll get to all of that, but we'll put all that all together. So there's going to be a time of indignation. And the term I can't even say it now, can I? Indignation refers to a time when God is upset and when he pours out his wrath upon someone or another. Now, at this point in time, we don't know if, just at this verse at least, we don't know if he's pouring it out upon his own people, upon a particular government, because at other times in different prophets, sometimes he's pouring it out on a foreign power, but often he's pouring it out on his own people because they're not obedient to him. Okay. And I think I'm going to stop right there for now, because if we go any further, we're going to get into too much and I'm not going to be able to finish explaining it. But take a look at verse 23, and then that is going to help us know what we were talking about at the time of the end. I thank you very much for your kind attention.